Perfect. Hello everybody. It's 2:03, so this is our version of getting started on time. Um, Appreciate you joining. I'm very excited to talk to my friend Sam, who is the founder and one of the consultants at QB. And so just to set the stage, I want you to introduce yourself. And I want you to do so with the following context. So the way I met you guys is maybe 3 years ago. I met somebody who works with you, and I was just asking her, I was asking this person, like, who do you follow? Who do you listen to? Who do you watch? Who do you work with? Like, who matters to you? And this person spoke very, very highly of QB. And then this would just come up over and over and over again. The clients who have worked with you for many years, the people who love you, the people who like continue to want to listen to you. And so I want you to introduce yourself, but I want you to do it in the context now that I really, shown your shoes for you a little bit. Like, what do you do? There's 1,000 consultants, and they just more come up every day. And quite honestly, there's a lot of layoffs happening right now. And the minute somebody gets laid off, they become yet another consultant. But what is it about you be or your approach or what you do or don't do that matters so much for your clients?
Yeah. I mean, quick answer. I can kind of give y'all to who I am and a little bit more about QB, but QB really launched with this idea of we're going to put people first, both in thinking about like the experiences we wanted to have as consultants, me and my co-founder Noemi, but also the experiences we wanted our clients to have and our teammates who worked with us. So I think how we value relationships and flexibility is one of the biggest drivers of the differentiators for us. Because, there's a lot of sharp, intelligent people doing this work, but we're all humans in the end navigating it together. But a little more formally about me, I am one of the co-founders at QB. I'm also the strategy lead. QB is a women-owned ESG strategy and communications firm. We're still holding on to ESG right now. I haven't got any official rebrands in my inbox yet, so that's what we're still known to today. We come to do this work with a deep belief that, really getting clear is very powerful. And saying what you mean, definitely meaning what you say is a form of leadership. So that's something we look to do in the way we show up as a firm, as a team, as consultants. And kind of what you were getting at is we don't see ourselves as traditional consultants. I certainly have never considered myself one, but we are former in-house leads, community builders, nonprofit operators, designers, data analysts, policy people, engagement specialists, and brand strategists. And to us, that really means that we know how to move the work forward inside a company and in the community, which I think is also part of the magic that we bring and a differentiator we bring to consulting is, yes, we have this like top-down corporate centric view, but we also know how to hold space for and elevate a grassroots perspective and a community-centered, kind of people-centered perspective in this work as well, which we bring across materiality, climate strategy, reporting work that we do. And, getting to what you were saying too, is like we really pride ourselves at meeting our clients where they are. And I think that comes with being flexible, like hella intentional and sharp. And really like time and time again, as you mentioned, this is what clients really rave about. I was in DC after a stakeholder convening around disaster resilience research, having drinks with one of my clients. And she just time and time again said, like, what I appreciate so much, and they're a massive, like, Fortune 100 company. What I appreciate from y'all so much is your flexibility, your willingness to, like, ebb and flow and show up and care for the work as I need to care for it as well. So we've been lucky to work with companies like New Relic, Bumble, Upwork, Red Wing Shoe Company, Verizon, and Warby Parker, just to name some of the cool ones, with most of those being multi-year relationships as well, which is something we value is like we love it when we can go deep with a client and really become their team who we're often working with inside the house with teams of one or two. And then I feel like particularly this year, that support has looked like helping our clients navigate tough conversations, all about surfacing like what are those real risks, particularly around climate risk, as we were just talking about, and kind of the wait time, and how do they communicate their work in ways that hold up under a lot of pressure and, of course, hopefully still reflecting, holding on to their values, I know we're having
Yeah.
some clients like throw those values at the door, which just like breaks our heart. Others are like,
Well, let's
those
talk
are
about
definitely
that.
true too.
I want
Yeah.
to talk about that a little bit. So we're gonna skip the like, everyone here is aware of what's going on. This isn't 2023 anymore. People are afraid to say certain words, yada yada yada. Everybody knows this. Let's jump like into one of those things. You even introducing yourself said we're, I forgot how you phrased it, but we're an ESG strategy firm. Maybe ESG, maybe not. We're sticking to it. Before we
Yeah.
talk about like the letters in that word, why do you think it matters what letters we use? I know one of our clients said I was presenting, I was working with this legal person there, and then I was doing a presentation to their CFO and chief technology officer and general counsel. And in our pre-meeting, I was like, what should I say or not say? Like, let's just tell me what the rules are. They go, don't talk about ESG. Don't you dare use the word DEI. If you're going to talk about things, even sustainability, talk about CSR. We're going back to corporate social responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm down with that. I'll play whatever game you want there. But like, why does it matter what words we do or don't use?
It matters because at the end of the day, you want to get the work done. But I feel like it's this fine balance of, and we were recently talking about this at a roundtable in San Francisco. It's a balance of you don't want to lose yourself in the process as well. So I think it's of what do we need to change so we are can focus on doing the work versus having the battles about doing the work without sacrificing who we are at the end of the day. I know like a big one in 2023, which felt like, oh, this is the foreshadowing of what's going to come. We were starting a materiality assessment with a new client, and prior to this, we had always said ESG, easy, no worries there. But they
Mhm.
were hard pressed that their work was to be called CSR. It is CSR, it is impact. We are not an ESG company. They're also like based in the Midwest. They work across sectors and who they sell their products to in terms of in-house and to customers directly. Um, and we always heard like we don't want to be a Bud Light kind of company too. So I think it's the idea of let's stay away from trigger words that get us caught in the media, and now we're on top of people's minds for this negative reason. And I think at the end of the day, it's the teams doing this work have always been more of a value add, not a detractor, and not a group that has a lot of attention on it, especially in a negative way. It's always been the thing you get awards for, accolades for, celebration, feel goods, and now all of a sudden it's like feel bad work in this weird way. So I think for us, it's, what are the words that don't lose the core of the outcomes we're
Mhm.
driving towards? And like let's focus on those.
I want one question there. If somebody comes to you and says, we're not going to use these words, we're going to use those,
Mhm.
do you ever push back or do you say, great, those are the words you want? Let's talk about that. And I'm curious both from your work with companies, but also some of the people on this call here do we'll call it ESG broadly, do the sustainability-ish work at their company. If their boss or general counsel comes to them and says, hey, nix these words, I don't want them. Should they push back for any reason or should they say, sure, pick the word you want as long as the work stays the same?
Yeah, I think it depends on, answering first, like, what are you protecting at the end of the day? And we can't protect everything. So, what is most important to be protected? And I think that guides a lot of starting to have that conversation of word picking, if you will. One example is I'm doing a lot of disaster resilience work, and this is a little less from a reporting specific perspective. But the social impact team was under the lens, was the first to be shaken up in terms of like, y'all gotta shake all your language. And their language is about, and the work we had been doing for the past couple years was around climate justice, climate equity, um, you know, money going to diverse businesses, women-owned, black-owned type of businesses as well. And they had to repackage all of that. So what we've been building is, now we're doing climate resilience, or really climate was taken off the board altogether. and it's disaster resilience work. But what we're focusing on is, and what I've been building for them is an internal messaging framework first that'll then move to external, which is about, like we're doing work for repurposing people's houses for long-term recovery, for, power resilience, for helping them be safe. So again, it's like breaking it.
And you guys are doing this work, or you're like telling the stories of companies doing this work?
Oh, I'm doing this work. Yeah. So we're in the midst of like building this internal framework so they can say, okay, how are we doing this so we can
Mm,
still serve the needs of people and communities without saying climate equity, climate justice, climate at all, which in some sense is, I know in some of our prep questions we asked about like bright spots. To me, that's kind of a bright spot because feedback we were getting from community members was also like climate equity doesn't really mean much to me. What I care about is, mobility, my economy, my job, my house, my power.
hmm.
And all of that's very like corporate philanthropy, disaster specific, but I think it's one scenario where unexpectedly this social impact team was having to like rebrand and reframe all the work that was massively funded and in progress so that they could keep doing it without any bumps. And luckily, we haven't had any delays because we were able to be nimble and move quickly and use language that actually resonated with people more. And that was the language that resonated with
Yeah.
corporate as well. Other examples are around, and I would say that was being driven because of big Congress merger type of decision. So again, it's like, what kind of hill are you going up? There was no chance to like renegotiate internally. It was more like a do and get it done. I think other options you have is like one of our clients works with hard of hearing technology and very much has based their whole business model on being inclusive. Yet, they were having debates on, we funded a white paper on inclusion that we were going to put up on our website and showcase it out there. And all of a sudden, legal wants to like scrap it from the website. And so then this, lead of sustainability is having to decide, am I fighting this battle? Am I fighting the battles to protect our ERGs? Am I fighting this other battle around like diversity and equity that I'm working on? So what matters most? What can you get done?
Yeah.
You want to cash your chips in for too.
Yeah. Uh, by the way, folks, there's a chat open and a Q&A open, so feel free to chime in anytime with questions for Sam or myself. Um, what do you think, talking about exactly what you just said, they have to pick their battles. What
Yep.
do you think across all the clients you're working with and the conversations you're having are battles that mostly people should put their swords down on? Like, this is just not where we should be focused with our time and our money. And that's what I mean. Like, maybe that's a bright spot of all this. Like, there was when 2022, three, when all the IRA passed and everybody was hooraying all this stuff that we were doing, like, you could get away with many things under the umbrella of sustainability or CSR. You could buy all the offsets, you could build all the reports, you can do all the equity, like all that stuff. And a lot of it got money. It was all lovely, but not all of it had the right place in a company, which is still a contentious statement, but nevertheless, I'll stand by it. What do you think are things that people are doing less of or should be doing less of where those good things come out? And what are the flip side of that? What is something that was happening at the peak of this whole movement 2 years ago that you really think should still be happening? That really is still very, very important. And if someone's getting pushback that we should drop this, they should fight for that particular thing.
Okay. Ask me your second question again after I get to the first one so I don't forget.
Okay.
Um,
If I remember it, we'll see.
Someone hold us to count for
Yeah, someone, I sent you a list of questions, but I'm not even looking. I just ignored it. I just come up with whatever comes to mind. So that list was totally unhelpful to either of us. But let's jump into this one.
the first question around like what are they doing that what do I think that they should still be doing? That comes to me as like as consultants, we can't make that choice for them. And I think this was, one of your questions that are no longer helpful to this conversation that you were asking me was around like tensions. And what do you do when you're supporting reporting teams that have tensions from legal, from marketing, sustainability, IR? Everyone feels like there's, mega trends that they're navigating and uncertain, and no one feels real confident. So that's a great mix for reporting. Like this has been a fun, fun ride over the past like 6 months. And you asked it specifically in the terms of like what type of person is ideal to have on the client side, representing your team. And I think about it in this long way of answering your first question is like, it doesn't necessarily matter the people or the person or the role. And it doesn't really matter like the topic, the issue, or the word, right? What matters is, did you do your materiality assessment? And I think this is where like my bright spot also is coming from this year is like, let's remember, or this is an unfortunate positive reinforcement of materiality assessments, exercises to identify your environmental social governance priorities are so profoundly helpful. Both in the context of this year, where you're like, what matters? What should I be talking about? Whiplash from headlines. Well, if you've done the due diligence to know what is important to your business, to the people you sell to the people who build your products, make your company work, you will be able to communicate that message really clearly. And then I was also thinking it in context of your original question, which was around tension. And it's not that people cause tensions per se, like we were talking about this in the first question of what makes QB unique. We pride ourselves as being like, we people are human. Human people are a variety of individuals. We can navigate different relationships. We're very empathetic and caring and can make that work. What we can't make work is creating a strategy where a strategy doesn't exist. And when a strategy doesn't exist, those are the most contentious reporting projects that we have because there's questions on implementation of, the strategy that doesn't exist or what actually should be talked about in a report. But when you have that materiality assessment outcome, you have those guardrails. You are locked in, you know what you should be narrowing down in or like fully focus on talking about. So to me, that's more of like the one thing that reporting teams or teams can be doing to feel grounded and centered and streamlined and knowing what they should communicate, no matter how, if I'm going to make up a word now, tyrannic, how much tyranny we live in these days.
So the lesson there is what is very difficult for you to walk into is a rudderless environment, just a place without a strategy around this. Where you guys can play big roles. Hey, if we've identified the strategy and you want help getting there, prioritizing it, laying it out, putting that stuff together, that's a really good place to be. And that is even more true today with limited resources than it was true a couple years ago. You can't do everything. You need every company has some different priorities that they can focus on. I'm sure Bumble does a lot more work around supporting women than Verizon does, but Verizon might do a lot more work around like community disaster response than Bumble would ever need to, which is about both of which I'm totally making up. Neither might be true, but those are the things that fit their what their stakeholders are looking for.
Yeah, they know what their customers care about. They know what's important to their long-term business success. And I mean, having that right there, what matters most to your employees, like you know what to talk about. You can feel distracted and uncertain. And I know like also we work with a lot of tech companies, or I feel like this is industry-wide, like AI, let alone like administrative politicalness, like AI is causing layoffs, making people look at doing the work differently, causing uncertainty. Every team is being asked to use AI. So, just another thing that leaders have going on in their heads while also trying to, as we are as sustainability people, advocate for space, talking about like employee experience, climate, emissions, other matters that can seem less pressing in this year.
What is the best way that either you or your clients are using AI today? Best meaning maybe most helpful, most successful, like gets to a positive final result. And where do you think AI is being shoehorned, where it either doesn't belong or provides immature results?
Yeah, I don't think we can say like what's best yet. It's still such a experiment. I mean, particularly on QB's end, like I think we've just started experimenting with it in the sense of, and I think broader too, like people are still trying to figure out how to use it on their teams. What I find to be an interesting trend is we are being asked to use or experiment using or being asked to have experience with tools that use AI to build reports. Um, we don't have that experience. I think not a lot of small firms have that per se in a big way. I think a lot of like the big, large firms do. But even in that sense, it's still something new. Um, and it kind of takes me back to the overall like hiring hard time people have in sustainability too, which is like people want massive amount of experience in one thing before they bring you on to do it. But we're working in a field that is still distinctly new and continually changing as well. So how AI will be used for reports, how hard or how important that will be to like winning future reporting work. I think the question is still out on that. We certainly believe at QB, having a human storyteller is so important. But certainly there's a lot of opportunity for leveraging AI in the desk research lift of it all. In the like, here's my climate risk world, here's my like DMA that I'm doing. Let's take in all this like external desk research that exists. Let's build out that long list of what could be potentially important as the starting basis, which lowers the lift on my time, my team's time. And then let's do what we do best, which is the people part. Let's have the conversations with the employees, with leadership, with customers, with community members, and take that list and add kind of the human nuance context to it. And then also the understanding of like what this means at the end of the day in terms of how it guides a company strategically and, what actually goes into its reporting, both voluntary and regulatory as well. So I think
Yeah,
AI plays a nice role at the beginning and kind of the end of pieces as well, but a lot of the messy middles are for people.
about a month ago on one of these webinars, I asked Mike Howard the same question, and Mike's like a corporate communications guy who writes a lot of these
Yeah.
reports. And his response to me was basically that his clients don't care who writes or what writes the report. They care what the outcome of it is and a little bit about the cost. And so
Mhm.
he uses AI for those first drafts, but also is very clear. He's like, any client can write their ESG report on AI. Like it's not rocket
Yeah.
science to get it to spit something out in a like it's totally doable. The hard part is the editing, the curation, the human storytelling, like you said, like the AI can actually tell probably a better story than the average person as well. But how are you going to explain that to an executive? How are you going to present that to the board? How are you going to restructure that to be a little more investor friendly, a little more employee friendly? Like that editing, that curation, the presentation part of it, like you could put together an ESG report or whatever with AI, but your board of directors doesn't want to read another ESG report. They want like a smart,
Yeah.
competent person in a suit to show up and say, here's the things you need to know. Shake my hand and look me in the eye and trust me. And by the way, the reports here backing that all up. And like, Elon Musk's robot aren't quite they're not ready for the board presentation yet.
Yeah.
It's gotta be a person at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, and then it feels like we're getting into this element of trust. Like we trust like people at the end of the day to carry something on, not necessarily like AI produced outputs.
Yeah, it's the person who pushes the button and then reviews it all before it goes anywhere. Like anybody can push the button, but like somebody with taste and expertise, I think matters a lot. Um, you brought up climate risk a few times.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'm a hammer here, and everything to me looks like a nail. But I never even heard the term 2 or 3 years ago. It just wasn't in the zeit. All anyone talked about was carbon emissions in the sustainability universe was emissions and offsets, which is just another side of emissions. Like it just wasn't really coming up. And TCFD had already been around for a few years, and there were companies who had these voluntary reports. It existed. But now, again, hammers seeing nails, but like climate risk is really increasing in the conversation. My take on it is partially because risk is a little less politically charged than save the planet and sustainability because you as an investor who you can easily make the argument I think anybody in the issue should attempt to make this argument to be their own foil that uh, money and time spent on sustainability is money and time taken away from shareholders. That if you're spending money on offsets, you should be spending it on product development. If you're spending money on writing, uh, doing better carbon emissions, you should be spending money on having cleaner, real financial accounting. You can make the argument. I don't agree with it. It's not my argument, but like there's an argument there. But when you talk about risk and resilience and the stuff that you just brought up about how do you harden homes against disasters so that like another LA fire hurts you less than your competitors or a huge heat wave doesn't knock out your data center, that is a risk conversation that's been around for 100 years. Disaster have been around forever. They've been impacting businesses. And so companies are leaning into it now because it feels a little bit less risque, pun intended, to talk about climate risk than it does around traditional sustainability. Now, that's a thesis. I'm curious what you think about that. And I also want to understand how have, if you've also, I think you guys have seen a big growth in climate risk conversations compared to what it was today. What are those conversations? What are people looking for? What are they looking for at the very basic levels? Like the people who have also just heard the word last week and they're just trying to figure it out. To companies like,
Mhm.
again, Verizon, who I'm sure has been doing, whether they called it climate risk or not, they've been doing resilience work since the day that company was founded. You can't run a telecom company and not worry about storms knocking over poles, whatever you want to call that. So, uh, A, does that thesis make sense? B, have you seen climate risk growing in the conversations your clients are having with you and how they're trying to communicate? And then C, what are they asking you for?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, definitely yes to climate risk conversations have been growing in that very specific way because of the California, legislation that we're all familiar with. Um, But really, I think it's like less about being risque and more of just it's a fact of our lives now. And especially in California, we've had these like compounded experiences of year over year fires upending many of these tech companies' employees. And it's this conversation of business resilience is a lot of what it's centered around. We'd be doing these materiality assessments in 2020, 2021, 2022, and many of kind of like the large tech companies were, or recently IPO tech companies at around that time, were doing their first DMAs. And, this question of how is climate change impacting your company would come up as a business resilience mind. And then, carbon emissions was this separate thing. I think what's now nice is we're seeing like, yes, business resilience still like a very large umbrella of what that could be. Like COVID fell under business
Yeah.
resilience, but now we're seeing carbon emissions feel more tangible to our climate strategy, decarbonization focus feel more tangible to tech companies in particular, who at the time didn't necessarily feel like they played any role in this climate conversation because they didn't have a manufacturing supply chain. So I think a lot of it is one, they've just experienced it themselves that has brought it, certainly regulatory, and then others, it's now this like tactical, tangible way they can wrap their heads around climate strategy, which I find, from a sustainability practitioner side, like that's great. That's really helpful. Like now we have something concrete we can all center this conversation on. And there's this, ideas of identifying climate risk, knowing what's most material financially to you. Now let's build your climate strategy with that information in mind and make it feel less abstract. I think for companies producing products, they certainly were more up to speed on climate risk and what this meant. But I think for a lot of tech companies, it made it something more easily grasped. So yeah, in terms of like conversations we're having now, a lot of it is very like SB 261 readiness focused. So how do I even begin identifying what my climate risks are? What does this work even cost? Because I'm getting, quotes and processes all over the place. Can this be light touch? Can this be not? One of my colleagues, Erica, and I were having this discussion yesterday as we're trying to see if we can have this work with a current client of ours. And they were like, hey, can you do this really lightly? Because I think also a lot of people in-house are asking, like, can I do this work by myself? What do I actually need from a bare minimum space to meet the regulatory requirements? And at first we were like, sure, yeah, we'd love to try that. Like, let's get you the world of information. So here are your inputs, and we will give you a framework for making that decision and assessing, starting to assess severity and the impact of this and the financial materiality of it all. But you internally need to take that through your internal process, and then
Mhm.
you'll go and draft your, first disclosure response. And we were like, great, we can do that in a light way, which we hadn't proposed yet. Then, the question came back to like, oh, can you write draft one? And we're like, wait, well, now we're kind of missing and hodgepodging this process when, there's going to be a risk held to who decides to write the pen, put the pen on paper. And certainly we will need a lot of context and understanding why those material changes, designations were made too. So I think that's just a lot of learning. Everyone's kind of doing this for the first time as well. But yeah, a lot of it has to do kind of trying to understand what is the scope of work that needs to have happen to meet these requirements that we don't really have guidance on yet. And a lot of people are asking, give me information about how to understand the financial impacts of these risks. And at QB, we mostly haven't already thrown out a solution for that because, in our sense, is there's not going to be a lot of our guess or our take is that there's not going to be a lot of financial requirements for the risks, at least in year one, that are deemed material too. So I think it's a lot of wait.
What do you mean by that? There's not going to be a lot of financial. You're just not going to have to like quantify these risks very deeply. You'll be
Yeah,
able to be a little more. Yeah.
yeah. We think there'll be more of a like ramp up to like disclosing, quantifying that information as well.
Yeah. Just a reminder, folks, there's both a chat and a Q&A open. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in. What do you think for these companies who want to do the light version or are considering doing it themselves? What do you think is the most difficult part of the climate risk process? Which part requires the most expertise or tools or just difficult to get started on? Or is all of it fairly straightforward?
I mean, I think in general it's all pretty straightforward, but it depends because you'll have your tools like Beehive to say like these are our financial risks. It's about putting inputs in an existing system that uses, auditable, diligent information to say like why it's making these decisions. So that's in one sense. And the other, it's doing the transitional risk. So kind of having those conversations and understanding the regulatory market implications of
Hmm.
that. I think that can vary. I think that's really helpful to have someone out of house assist with that or give you a like, let me look at you as an organization and give you that take. Um, I think where it can really range on it is this hard or not is, how mature is a company's like internal audit process or process for how they are determining what is financially material. I think, it can range on that
Hmm.
maturity level. But if it's there and they have a process, I think it's great. If it's not, you might be creating that for this moment and something unique. But,
Yeah.
and you're also working with people who are grasping climate conversations still sometimes for the first time. So having, I think definitely in this year one, having external support is useful. And hopefully, ideally, this isn't another thing that people have to expense a large budget for or takes a lot of their time because I know the end goal is just having more resilient companies working in California, kind of like reducing our overall emissions risk and certainly not intending to be this massive burden on already strapped teams.
Yeah, the way I see this regulation, the analogy is like when I was a kid, I decided at some point I just don't eat any vegetables. And I would like only eat like pasta and potatoes. And
Yeah.
so what my parents did is that they gave me like an allowance, even like $5. But what I had to do was I had to write it, put this big thing in the kitchen for my sister and I, and we had to check off that we did eat vegetables that day. And we just like we had to put a check on this box. We did that for like 7 days in a row. We get our $5. And if we
Yeah.
didn't, then we don't get our $5. And their goal was not to get me to check a box that said I eat the vegetable. Like they don't care if I wrote something down or not. The goal is to get me to do the thing. They like thought I'd live a better life if I ate some spinach, for God's sakes. And I think this regulation is a similar thing here. Like the reporting stuff is in some ways could be a box checking exercise. Like nobody cares if you have yet another report. God forbid. I hate reports. I make money on reports and I hate reports. Like no one wants yet another report. Now, there's some value to an investor seeing it or whatever, but like no one wants another report. The goal here is for you to eat your vegetables. Is
Yep.
for you to become a more resilient organization so that next time LA has a wildfire or there's a terrible drought somewhere or a heat wave comes through, your business is not as impacted as it would have been otherwise, which means California's economy and America's economy, and your employee livelihoods and whatever else are not as impacted as they would have been otherwise. Now, this report is a way to get you to put up there in front of everybody whether you're doing it or not. But like you said, like the goal is not for you to every year, every other year, let's hire another consultant to write us another report. The report is not the point. The point is doing this work around managing your risks and around figuring out how do you respond to disasters? How do you respond to changing regulations? How do you respond to changing market conditions? And that is should be an in-house process, just like it is for most other material risks, just like it is for cybersecurity, right? These companies, I even see some of the folks on here, y'all don't hire a cybersecurity consultant every year to talk about your cybersecurity practices. Like
Yeah.
that's not what you do. You have a series of tools and in-house ability and like people embedded in, and maybe a consultant got you started, taught you the ropes, explained to you where your gaps are. Maybe you bring someone in every couple of years ago to say, hey, I'm trying to wrap my head around like what is AI going to do to our cybersecurity and what do I need to change and what's best in class here. Then you build the muscles yourself, you build those capabilities yourself. And so I think that's the way the best companies I talk to think about this is like that is yes, there's a new
Yeah.
thing, but in many ways we've either been doing this or wanted to be doing this for a long time, and we want to build up the muscle to be a more resilient organization. And this is not like a theoretical 2050, more resilient if our employees like us, or we have a lot of like different mindsets and backgrounds in our employee base. There's like a tangible like, will a wildfire knock out your warehouse or not? Will a
Yeah.
heat wave cause your data center costs to spike by 5x or not? It's like a fairly straightforward, resilient meaning of the word resilient. I think that's where all this stuff is headed. And that's how the best organizations are doing it. Some are just, nah, I don't have time this year. Write me something and get out of my face. That's fine too.
Yeah. I mean, and that's just what we're going to face more and more over the coming next 5 years, especially like becoming this deregulated world. Like our climate risk aren't gonna decrease. But what you were riffing on was also just making me think of like the broader context that we came to this conversation too, which is, I think reporting overall is having its moment in the sun for better or worse. And this year is forcing a saying like reporting, doing this work was never like for the report, even though so much of people's time is on the report. 6, 9 months out of the year, I have project teams working on reports. And then it's kind of this like summer, 3 months, 4 month sprint that, sustainability leads are trying to accomplish something. And so my hope is all of this really shakes the report up and say like the reason we started reporting it anyways was to like have transparency, have accountability, but like get the work done. So I'm hoping what we see as a outcome of this year is more reporting that's in service of getting the work done, which there's a lot of value in storytelling and figuring out how to do that well, because stories move hearts, which makes change makers, which gets permissions and budgets. But maybe we can think of how we're going to do that outside of this like annual big impact report too.
So I want to end on the conversation of this annual big impact report.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, these reports were all 30, 40, 50 pages, and people had a lot to say. And they were very long, they were beautifully designed, they were lovely. This year, companies are cutting those way down. They're
Hmm.
saying less. Many of them are doing less storytelling. They're just putting in required disclosures. I know companies who, even if they're not changing a lot of the um, framework for their report, they're not adding anything new. So as one example, I know one company who had an impact report for a couple of years. They deleted every mention of DEI from previous impact reports and just re-uploaded that. And this year, they're doing another impact report, no DEI, but they're not even adding TCFD. They know they have to, they know it's the law, yada yada. But like they're just like, I'm just gonna put that somewhere else. I don't want anything new.
Yeah.
At the same time, today I was doing a little research and I found a company I won't mention. It's like a public, $2 or $3 billion tech company, and they never had an ESG report until this year. They published their first, and it was 50 pages. I'm looking
Mhm.
at it now on the screen, and it is beautiful. This
Mhm.
thing just like is some of the most gorgeous designed PDF I've ever seen in my life. Man, I'm scrolling through it, and this was a beast to put together and write. And it's based, funny enough, on 2023 data. So I can just see exactly what happened here. This was 2023. They were hype. They were doing their thing. IRA's out. Everybody's into it. Like we still like Larry Fink. ESG is here forever. And then they finished their missions. And then 2024, they're beginning to put together the report, and they hired a consultant or an in-house person, and they're organizing, they're writing, they're typing, they have a monthly check-in to see section by section by section. And they're like almost done. And then they're sprinting to the end of the year, and then all of a sudden the election happens and Trump wins, and their general counsel says, hold on a minute, should we publish this? Like, really, we should publish this? And they had a big long debate internally. Should we not? Shall we? Won't we? What should we take out? You know what? We did the work. Let's publish it. Let's see what happens. And now they're talking 2 years later about their data, and it's this big fancy report. These poor
It's a
guys.
big fantasy report.
A big fancy report.
Big
Let's
fancy
assume it's not
report.
fantasy. It's a big fan. It's really. I should share my screen. It's beautiful. Um, so many pictures. What is changing in this big annual report? Because your guys' business for a while was how do we help our clients tell their story in this big annual report? Because that was the market. That's what people wanted. What role does that big fancy annual report still play, in which is very important? And
Mhm.
then where's it getting gutted? Like what's changing? What are other mediums for communicating the same messages that normally went into this one big annual report?
Yeah. I mean, I would still say a huge chunk of our business is the annual impact report. Certainly, like half of our business is comms, half of our business is strategy at QB, which has been nice in a lot of ways. Those can play really well together as we've like talked. So I think this year we're not going to see too much drastic shifts. The budgets and the plans to make these reports started before the election. And I know my teams and others across other firms and in-house have been advocating to publish, to keep the story that reflects the data and the actions that happen. We've been working with teams as they've rebranded senior leader exec sponsors titles or focused in on just inclusion or employee experience or employee engagement. I think more commonly we see the DEIB type of section get the most like rip out, turned upside down kind of maneuvered. I think totally taking out climate is a bit more of a rare case that I've seen so far. Um, and a lot of it has been, let's get the report out this year. It reflects like what you did. Like that's been our piece of like helping our clients achieve their goals for their reports, and represent the changing dynamics that people have. I think where we're start to see is the beginning of this quarter when people are thinking about like, am I going to do that big impact report again? Am I going to put the budget towards the same that I've always put towards? Am I going to do something completely new? I think that will start to shake out in September as these projects get locked down so that they can publish in March, April, May, June, July type of framework. I think we'll see. I'm excited to see what will happen. I know we've had discussions on like, let's have this be more internal employee facing messaging because at the end of the day, talking about equity, inclusion, diversity matters to your employees and certainly can come out in a recruiting atmosphere for new employees, but it's a very like employee resonant message outside of maybe how you're designing and creating products, which can be a different consumer type of message. And then, what is the purpose of the CEO letter and really what should be brought up in that conversation? How much is it sticking in this large impact report, or does it show up in a different space on a website or in internal comms? And then I think, to your example, a lot of people are leaning on, well, what's regulatory required? Like if we have to do this like TCFD type of report for California regulation, let's have it in there and we don't need to pay for more pages to be capturing all our disclosures in one place in this PDF that, can be a high budget and take a lot of consultants and in-house's times as well to do right and to replicate in multiple places. I know people are also experimenting with like segmentation. The talk we were just doing on Tuesday was with a lot of like calm sustainability leaders. And the big piece coming out of that is just like, how are we going to segment our message? Instead of putting our message in one place, let's put it in a couple different places. So
Mm.
I know a lot of storytellers and comms people, their bright spot, I'm sure, is like, great, we have something fun, new to pitch, to chew on, to eat, and really finally make tailored messaging to make tailored sustainability messaging to these diverse audiences that I think companies will be more open to when it comes to kind of like the Q4 2025 report booking season. So I
Yeah.
think that exact answer is yet to be told.
I want to, I might ask this question in a negative way, but it's meant to
Yeah.
be a positive tone. Um, but I think but right before we started, you said that a lot of the work is basically keeping people in their seats, like making sure
Mhm.
this whole movement continues. And there's a lot of layoffs happening in our world, and there's a lot of cuts and budget cuts. And what our job is like service providers to these professionals is to help them find the most value add work that really, really, really helps their company with whatever their company cares about. And most of that means make more money or save some money. But that could be the softer stuff around employee engagement, whatever, if that's what that company, like you said, really cares about and their strategy really is in that. What in your mind is the best place for some of the companies, if you're someone on this call right now, where should you be focused this year to make sure that you're adding the most high level, high leverage work you can possibly be doing? What either are specific things that these companies should be doing, or what are some questions or frameworks that they should ask themselves to make sure that they're working on something high leverage and they're not swept up in the next round of layoffs?
Yeah. I mean, certainly there's like the compliance check of it all. So, are you value add there? Are you meeting those requirements? And then I think a lot of it is, less of this long-term visioning that we have loved to do over the past like 10 plus years, and more of just saying like, what is the short-term priorities of this company and how does the work that I do align to that? Like when we think about social impact work per se, as one example, so much of that work is about customer acquisition in some way. It's a company's ability to reach a non-traditional future customer that they could have. It's part of like a long-term acquisition pipeline. So I think there's certainly ways to frame the work that you do from a customer perspective, from an employee retention perspective is huge, and lots of case to be made there from diversity equals innovation to doing a sustainability, social impact, what you want to call it, work equals employee retention equals people, maybe not completely deciding to apply to your company, but if they have a choice between company one and company two has these additional efforts, like I'm going to pick company two. So this work matters to core priorities. So I think it's like tapping into those short-term core priorities and showing that value now. And, let's go for the ride. It's going to be a short-term look over the next, this year, 3 years that we're going to be on. And the most important is let's keep people in their seats. Let's keep people having jobs. We love this work. I know so many people who just want to do the work, and it's so much harder to get your hands on the work these days in-house and as consultants at times as well too. So I think it's kind of helping us all stay around and keep making progress.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate it, Sam. It is always very, very fun to talk to and learn from you. And thank you all very much for joining.
Yeah.
Um, we have some amazing webinars coming up. We do this every single Thursday at 2 p.m. Next week is just a Beehive product deep dive. So if you're an existing customer or just want to see what we're working on, we're going to go through all of it. The week after that, we're interviewing Dave Stanges, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Apollo, the world's largest private equity firm. And the week after that, we're interviewing Brendan Maloney, who runs sustainability at DocuSign. So thank you, everybody. You can find Sam on LinkedIn or their website, consultqb.com. And I appreciate it. Everybody be well, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thank y'all. Bye.
Bye.